white-knuckled, gritting your teeth, clenched jaw, red face. Can you feel it? These are moments when anger just takes over, doesn't it? What do you do when that happens? How do you keep yourself from being overtaken by this angry mask? Welcome to Live It. This is your chance to take Sunday's message and sink it into your week with direct and practical ways to apply it and be challenged by it. I'm Sam, I'm one of the pastors here at RCC, and on Sunday, Pastor Mike addressed the angry mask. He described how some people, especially guys, we're notorious for this, can wear the angry mask as a way of appearing strong or cool or as some macho kind of thing. Except it's not any of those things. God actually calls people who get angry quickly, he calls them fools. It's in Ecclesiastes. He says, control your temper, for anger labels you a fool. Now, I know what you're thinking. Sometimes it's good to get angry. Sometimes circumstances demand it, and you'd be right. Jesus even got angry. Once he got angry when some religious leaders were more concerned with whether he worked on the Sabbath than if he healed a man's deformed hand, changing his life for the better. He looked at those religious guys with some anger. I imagine it was some serious side-eye, like the most serious side-eye you've ever seen. There's this time when another person, David, King David, but before he was even officially king, he'd been chased by the actual king of the time, King Saul, literally running for his life, always afraid that he'd be killed by Saul, multiple attempts. There's this time when Saul enters a dark cave where David and his men had been camped out and hiding out. Saul went there to relieve himself. They had to do that back then too, like it's a quick trip stop. Like he's going in this dark cave to relieve himself. And David was in there too, right? And Saul was defenseless. It was dark and he couldn't see anything, and there he is relieving himself, and David had his chance to release all of his anger out on this guy who was literally trying to kill him. What does he do? He crawls forward and he's encouraged by his men to just get rid of him. He's vindicated for it. He could be vindicated. And David, he cuts off some of his cloak, of Saul's cloak, and then immediately realizes he shouldn't have done it. This is what it says in 1 Samuel. It says, but then David's conscience began bothering him because he had cut Saul's robe. The Lord knows I shouldn't have done that to my lord the king, he said to his men. The Lord forbid that I should do this to my lord the king and attack the Lord's anointed one, for the Lord himself has chosen him. Then he keeps his men from killing them, the king. He holds them back. If you know the rest of the story, this is actually how David shows King Saul that he's not out to get him at all. And Saul stops chasing him that day because of it. And this is all because he was able to thoughtfully direct his anger. How do you do that? How do you use your anger in the best way possible? Mike mentions these in his sermon. We were reading this book by Rich Villodas called The Deeply Formed Life, and in it, he asks some questions, these 4 questions, and these are questions you can use to help you react to the anger that you have in your life in the best way. They're the kind of questions I imagine David might have had racing through his brain. The first is this: what are you feeling? Sometimes we don't even realize that we're feeling something, so we have to ask, what are you feeling? The second is, what are you telling yourself about what you're feeling? We have these reactions to it. The third is this: what does God say? Often it's different than what we're telling ourselves. And finally, the fourth one is, what counter-instinctual action needs to be taken? That's what God would have us do. There are times when anger is warranted, right? There are injustices and cruelties in our world that demand it. But if we're honest, that's probably the exception, not the rule. Which is why how the anger comes out matters so much. In James 1:19 it says, understand this, my dear brothers and sisters, you must all be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to get angry. Now, the angry mask is easy to hide behind. It's easy to hide behind, but it does so very little for us. Let's take it off and use our anger in ways that God directs. To help you do that this week, I have some questions for you. The first is this: how regularly do you feel yourself getting angry? Is it daily, weekly? How often does it happen? Question number 2: what are the typical ways your anger comes out, or maybe doesn't come out? Sometimes we stuff it in. The third question is this: when you assess what you're often angry about, what does God say about those things? What does God say about what you're angry about? And then finally, The fourth question is, what counter-instinctual actions do you need to get into the habit of taking instead? Now, that's a lot of stuff. Maybe you're wrestling with those things, but if I can tell you one thing and give you one challenge for this week, it's this. Mike mentioned it. I thought it was gold. He said, pray to 10 before you respond. Maybe you've heard count to 10. That's great. Praying to 10, even better. If you've ever had a moment where you're angry and you've stepped away to pray first, you know how much it helps. So I challenge you, when you get angry this week, pray to 10 before you respond. Thanks for being here. Thanks for living it with me, and I can't wait to see you next week.